The tourists laughed, threw coins, and mocked the guardsmen, believing they could do anything. But one boy in a wheelchair changed everything. The guardsman's actions silenced the crowd and made the world believe in heroes again. London, noon. Buckingham Palace basked in the sunlight, its facade carved out of age-old tradition, a reminder of a bygone era of kings and knights. The air carried a mix of restrained grandeur, and the sharp, sour scent of hot dogs wafting from tourist kiosks. Every square inch here was steeped in history, but for the crowd, it was merely a backdrop for the best photo of the year. In the foreground stood him, the guardsman. Tall, imposing, clad in a perfectly pressed scarlet tunic and the iconic bearskin hat that looked both weightless and heavy. His face was motionless, not a muscle moved, not the faintest hint of emotion. He stood as if time itself had stopped. To the tourists, he was anything but human. A decoration, a wax figure, an attraction. That's why the young man in the ridiculous pineapple-patterned Hawaiian shirt decided his moment to shine had arrived. Arm outstretched with his phone, signature smirk in place, the show began. "Hey man, what, no jokes? Look at him, stiff as a rock. Come on, smile. It might make you feel better." The camera rolled. The man flailed in a ridiculous dance, pulling faces, oblivious to the eyes on him. Or maybe he noticed but mistook them for applause. In his mind, he was the star. The crowd grinned. Someone else recorded him. Of course, he was a top-tier comedian. And the guardsman? He was nothing but background decor. "Honestly, I want to touch that hat too," screeched a woman in leopard print leggings, her voice grating like nails on glass. She smirked and reached for the towering hat, stepping over the line that should never be crossed. Tourists had paid for tickets after all. In their minds, everything was allowed. Laughter, explosions of carefree cackles. The crowd swelled and boiled, like a kettle left too long on the stove. Selfie sticks emerged. A teenager collapsed dramatically to the ground in mock bowing before the guardsman. And yet, he remained untouched by it all. Unmoving. A steel statue whose composure was forged in discipline and years of service. A rock, unbreakable. Now that's self-control, thought one of the more sensible tourists deeper in the crowd. But their voice, the voice of reason, was quieter than a mosquito's buzz. They didn't interfere. Why would they? It wasn't their show. Meanwhile, a faint squeak of wheels echoed from the side. Through the thick crowd, a father pushed his young son in a wheelchair. The boy couldn't have been more than 7. Thin, pale, holding a small British flag in trembling hands. His wide grey-blue eyes were locked on the guardsman. To him, this wasn't just a figure. This was a hero, a living legend. "Dad, can he shake my hand?" The boy whispered softly, as though afraid to disturb the sacred atmosphere. The father bent down, his face clouded. "Son, he's on duty. He can't move. It's his job." But the boy's gaze never wavered. In his world, there were no protocols, no unspoken rules, just hope. Because heroes always notice those who need them most, don't they? The tourists continued their charade, treating the scene like their personal circus. The man in the Hawaiian shirt leaned toward a friend. "Watch this. I'll get to him. Get your camera ready. This'll go viral." My God, who does this? This is beyond wrong, thought anyone with an ounce of decency left. But out loud, no one said a word. The crowd roared with laughter. The guardsman stood still, and the boy waited. In that silence, everything collided. Disrespect, mockery, and one small child's dream, too quiet for the adults to hear. The crowd swelled like a restless, noisy sea, growing louder with every second. Laughter and screeches tangled into a cacophony, a chaotic hum like someone had forgotten to turn off a bad reality show. Cameras clicked, social media feeds filled up with captions like, "London's royal clowns on guard." Royal clowns? Who does that? If the guardsman's eyes could stray from his post, he might have hurled silent lightning bolts at anyone who dared to think such things. But he didn't move. Proud, immovable, a statue revered for generations. Come on, just one shot with a smile. Why are you so stone-faced? We paid for this, you know, barked the same man in his miserable pineapple shirt, his voice slicing through the air like a slap. Paid for this. Oh, yes. In their minds, tickets and coins had replaced basic respect. To them, the man in the scarlet uniform wasn't a soldier or a symbol of tradition. He was a prop, a street performer on demand. A coin flew toward the guardsman's feet. A pitiful, clinking insult, venom disguised as a joke. Someone snickered. Oh, look, maybe he'll pick it up. He's gotta eat too, right? The coin struck the cobblestones and fell silent. He didn't move. Of course he didn't. He had seen it all before. Coins, paper scraps, hands reaching for his hat. The tourists played their petty games, and he stood his ground. But the boy in the wheelchair still waited. His grey-blue eyes, large, innocent, filled with wonder, stayed fixed on the guardsman. There was no mockery there, no demands, only pure admiration. His small hand gripped the tiny flag, the fabric trembling lightly in the breeze. He's just a doll at his post. What's there to wait for? Be grateful you're even standing close, scoffed a tall man in a baseball cap, shoving people aside. His words spilled like acid over the scene. The boy's father tightened his grip on the wheelchair and stepped forward. Excuse me, can we just pass through? But who in this crowd cared for anyone but themselves? A sharp shove in the shoulder, muttered grumbles, a deliberate block in their path. Sorry, pal, we want our photo too. The boy's eyes never left the guardsman. He waited, hope still burning. Please, please, see me. And then it happened. The guardsman moved. It was almost imperceptible at first. A subtle shift in his shoulders, then the deliberate, weighted step forward. One step, then another. His black boots, polished to a mirror shine, crossed the white line, the line that must never be crossed. The crowd held its breath, whether from shock or reverent anticipation, no one could tell. The guardsman moved. He broke protocol, the very protocol that clung to him like armor, shielding him from everything human, emotions, doubts, spontaneous actions. Step by step, he advanced toward the boy. His heavy black boots, their toes polished to a mirror shine, struck the cobblestones softly, yet deliberately. Each step echoed like the pounding of a heartbeat, loud, steady, unshakable. Camera shutters clicked feverishly, and only the most nervous voices pierced the stunned silence. Is this staged? Someone murmured indignantly, as though the guardsmen had betrayed their right to free entertainment. He's not supposed to move! They can't! Grumbled the man in the Hawaiian shirt, clutching his phone so tightly, his knuckles turned white. But the guardsman simply walked, looking at no one, reacting to nothing. And when the space between him and the boy shrank to just a few steps, the guardsman stopped. A second passed, an eternity in disguise. Then he knelt, slowly, deliberately, like a knight kneeling before a prince or a weary soldier bowing before his king. The bearskin hat remained steady, towering above him, but his gaze, still inscrutable, was now level with the boy's. A gloved hand, immaculate in its white fabric, gently touched the boy's shoulder. Your flag is magnificent, young sir, the guardsman said. His voice, deep and rough like a man who speaks only when his words truly matter, rippled through the square. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. For the first time all day, no one smiled. No one laughed. Even those who had mocked moments ago, the ones who giggled at the absurd dance of a tourist, had lowered their cameras and simply watched. The boy sat frozen, afraid to breathe, as though moving might shatter the moment like glass. His wide, glimmering eyes flickered with awe, and he slowly extended his small, trembling hand. The guardsman took it, not lightly, not as an empty gesture, but as a firm, real handshake, the kind a man gives to another man. You're a real hero, sir, the boy whispered, his voice quivering like a leaf caught in a breeze. For a moment, it seemed even the stone walls of Buckingham Palace bowed in respect to those words. The guardsman gave the faintest nod. Then, without another word, he rose, once again tall, unshakable, a tower of resolve. And yet, somehow, he appeared even more majestic than before. He turned and walked back, each step ringing out like a drumbeat in the heavy silence. Crossing back over the white line he was never meant to pass, he resumed his place, his movements measured, deliberate. The crowd remained still. Even the man in the Hawaiian shirt, his earlier smugness wiped clean, stared blankly at his phone, likely hoping he wouldn't become the headline of the next top 10 tourist idiots of the week. Finally, someone in the crowd whispered, "That wasn't just a guardsman. That was a man. A hero." An awkward hush hung in the air like thick fog. Moments ago, this crowd had been chaos. Laughter, shouts, shameful Instagram stories. Now, silence. A silence where respect had finally found room to exist. No one laughed. No one threw coins. Those who had jeered moments earlier now stared at the ground. Grown adults, once convinced they owned the stage, suddenly realized the true leader here was the man who refused to lose himself, even in the face of humiliation. The guardsman stood at his post once more, his back straight, gaze fixed in the distance, as if nothing had happened. The internet exploded. The video of the guardsman breaking protocol for the boy spread like wildfire across every platform. It began in silence, the very moment when the guardsman knelt and shook the boy's hand. There was no shouting, no chaos, only humanity, which for a moment had proven more powerful than any rulebook. A guardsman breaks protocol for a child. This moment is breathtaking. When tradition bows to humanity, the most powerful video out of London. Hundreds of thousands of comments flooded in. The same tourist who had laughed and mocked vanished into nothingness against the weight of one heroic act. He didn't have to. He wasn't supposed to. But he did. That's honor. You know what's sad? That man showed us what it means to be a hero, and we all just stood there laughing. Still think the Royal Guard is just a joke? Watch and learn. Of course, as with everything in the age of social media, some voices tried to ruin the moment with their petty bitterness. It's his job, not a circus. He shouldn't break rules for sad eyes. But others quickly shut them down. You really don't get it, do you? If there were more guardsmen like him, this world wouldn't feel so cold to kids and adults alike. News cameras soon turned their focus to the boy and his father. In a morning broadcast, the father spoke. It was a moment my son will remember for the rest of his life. He always said real heroes don't wear capes. And you know what? He was right. The boy, still frail but now beaming with quiet confidence, clutched his tiny British flag and said just a few words. Now I know heroes are real. His words became the headline of the day. Some dismissed it as just a guardsman, but most understood. This was something more. Something bigger than tradition. Bigger than rules. The next day, oddly enough, Buckingham Palace looked the same as always. Tourists still flocked to the gates. Cameras still clicked. Laughter still floated on the breeze. But something had shifted. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a faint wind signaling change. The same guardsman stood at his post, as always. Scarlet uniform pristine, bearskin hat towering, gaze steady. Cameras turned toward him, but no one jeered. No one shouted, "Hey, smile for the camera!" A strange hush lingered around him. Anyone who passed seemed to remember yesterday's video. And yes, they felt it. Shame. Even those who still viewed him as part of the show now lowered their cameras slightly and spoke in whispers. A young man with a phone paused in front of the guardsman. After a moment, he muttered awkwardly, Thank you for your service." Simple words, but heavy with meaning. The ending? It was as understated and symbolic as the guardsman's actions. He stood still, unwavering. Then, caught by the quiet breeze of routine, he squared his shoulders slightly and adjusted his hat, just as he had done thousands of times before. And that's it. He's back in place. You know why? Because real heroes don't need applause. They just do what's right. Sometimes by breaking the rules, sometimes by holding the line. Somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. softly, tentatively. A lone thank you. Others joined in, and soon the sound swelled. The guardsman, of course, didn't react. He stood resolute, as always, because sometimes, to preserve tradition, you must break it, for something greater. And in that silent strength lay the answer to everything.